She walked into her ex-husband's millionaire wedding with their twin daughters, uninvited, and shattered his perfect lie in front of everyone. What he hid for years unraveled in seconds. What she did next left the entire crowd stunned. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of rising from the ashes and reclaiming your truth. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories that hit straight to the heart. It was a Tuesday evening, one of those calm, golden hours when the house glowed with soft light and everything felt exactly in its place. I had just finished setting the table, placing the last of the white lilies in a blue ceramic vase David had brought me from a business trip to Tokyo years ago. The roast was in the oven, the twins were upstairs finishing their homework, and my cream silk dress, David's favorite color on me, flowed as I moved from the kitchen to the dining room. Everything was perfect, or at least it looked that way. 8 years of marriage had made me fluent in his habits. I knew when his mood was off by the way his keys sounded when they hit the console. I knew if he'd had a good day by how long he let the front door linger open, as if waiting to breathe in the life we'd built together. That evening, I heard the door close a second too soon. I froze by the stove, instinct humming low in my bones. Something was wrong. "Hey," he said flatly, stepping into the kitchen. He didn't kiss me. Didn't take off his jacket or loosen his tie like he usually did. He didn't even glance at the dinner table I had carefully arranged with his favorite wine and the girls' hand-drawn place cards. "Hi," I said with a smile that cracked just slightly at the edges. "You're home early." He nodded, almost like he didn't hear me. Then, as if he'd rehearsed the moment all day, he said it. 4 words that knocked the air out of my lungs. "We need to talk." I blinked. "Okay, is something wrong?" He didn't sit down. He just leaned against the island, looking at me like a lawyer preparing to deliver a verdict he'd already made peace with. "It's us. This marriage." There was a pause. Not the kind that leaves room for hope, but the kind that closes doors. "I'm not happy, Monica. I haven't been for a long time." I couldn't breathe. I remember that clearly. My body forgot how. The world, the real one with walls and hardwood and the smell of rosemary, blurred. "I don't understand," I said, and I didn't. Just that morning he'd kissed me goodbye like he always did. Just the night before we'd curled up on the couch and watched Nora's school play on video. He laughed. He kept talking, but all I remember was the sound of my own heart beating so loud I thought the twins might hear it from upstairs. "You've become predictable," he said. "This life, it's suffocating me. I need something more. More than this. More than the woman who gave up her design scholarship, her career, her very name to build a home, a family, a sanctuary for him." My voice came out small. "Are you seeing someone?" He hesitated, and that was all the answer I needed. "There doesn't need to be someone else," he said, which of course meant there was. "You're just not enough anymore." Not enough. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not like glass or thunder, but like a thread that finally snapped after years of holding too much weight. I remember staring at him, this man I once thought I'd grow old with, and realizing he wasn't mine anymore. Maybe he never had been. "What about Sophie and Nora?" I asked. "What do I tell them?" "They're resilient," he said, already walking toward the foyer like his part in this performance was over. "They'll be fine. We'll figure it out." That night, after the girls had eaten dinner in uncomfortable silence and gone to bed clutching stuffed animals they hadn't touched in months, I sat in the kitchen alone. The roast had gone cold. The wine remained untouched. The place cards mocked me. It was as if someone had taken a hammer to my life and shattered it into pieces too sharp to gather. I stayed there until the sun came up. Then I wiped my face, packed the girls' lunches, and smiled like my world hadn't just collapsed into a pile of lies and forgotten vows. Because that's what women like me do. We don't fall apart where our children can see. We bleed in the shadows and stitch ourselves back together before anyone notices we were ever broken. But I was broken. And no matter how tightly I tried to bind those wounds, they festered in the silence. The days that followed blurred into a painful rhythm. Custody arrangements, a court-appointed lawyer I couldn't afford, David's new condo in the city that he somehow already had leased, and worst of all, The look on my daughter's faces the first time he missed his weekend with them. "He's busy, baby," I told them. "Work emergency." But they knew, and I knew. We all knew. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined in those nights of grief and ramen noodles and eviction notices, was that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. Because sometimes the fire that burns you down is the same fire that teaches you to rise. I moved into the apartment on a rainy Thursday, the kind of rain that feels personal, sharp, unforgiving, like the sky itself is reminding you just how far you've fallen. Sophie and Nora clutched their little backpacks and stared at the peeling paint and broken mailbox like we'd stepped into a different life. And we had. The place smelled like mold and reheated sadness. The faucets screamed when I turned them on, and the hot water lasted precisely 3 minutes. But it was all I could afford on what I was making. $9.75 an hour, cleaning offices after dark, and a few extra bucks sewing hems and fixing zippers for neighbors who couldn't afford new clothes. David was court-ordered to pay $800 in child support. Most months it arrived late. Sometimes it didn't arrive at all. And when I asked about it, he sent me one-liners like, "Some of us have real careers to worry about." I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to his sleek downtown apartment, bang on the door, and demand that he look me in the eyes while his daughters cried themselves to sleep. But I didn't, because I was too busy surviving, too tired, too damn ashamed. The first night in the new apartment, the heat didn't work. I bundled the girls in sweatshirts and let them sleep beside me under every blanket we owned. I told them we were having a camping night, and they giggled and made shadow puppets on the wall, because they were still young enough to believe me. But when they finally fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the neighbor's television and the occasional car alarm echoing in the alley. I thought about who I used to be. The girl who dreamed of opening her own fashion label, who sketched wedding dresses and runway gowns in the margins of textbooks. The woman who believed that if she gave everything to her marriage, love would be enough. How naive. I was scrubbing toilets by day and sweeping conference room floors by night, my hands raw and chapped from bleach and ammonia. I wore gloves until they split, and then I didn't wear gloves at all. Every night I came home with sore knees and a stiff back, and somehow there was still more to do. Laundry, school forms, dinner, bedtime stories. Nora started having nightmares. Sophie stopped talking at school. "Are we poor now, Mommy?" Sophie asked one night as she watched me count change for a gallon of milk. I lied. "No, sweetie, we're just starting fresh." But the truth was heavy. It lived in my chest like a stone, dragging me down every time I tried to breathe. David called less and less. He canceled visits with excuses that sounded polished and practiced. Emergency deposition. Client dinner ran late. Eventually he stopped making excuses at all. He just disappeared. One Friday, Nora came home crying. Another girl had brought cupcakes to school and passed them out to all her friends, except Nora. She said her mom told her not to share with me because we're from the bad apartments. I held my daughter in my arms, and I wanted to scream at the world. But I couldn't afford the luxury of anger. I had to be strong. For them, for me. For the version of myself that still lived somewhere beneath the exhaustion and broken dreams. So I found a second job, waitressing on weekends. It meant I barely slept. It meant I missed Saturday mornings with my daughters. But it also meant groceries. It meant shoes that fit their growing feet. It meant I could keep the lights on. Some nights after my shift ended and the girls were asleep, I sat at our wobbly kitchen table with my old sketchbook. I didn't plan to. I didn't even think I had anything left to draw. But the lines came anyway. Hesitant at first, then faster. Jackets with strong shoulders. Dresses with lines that wrapped the body like armor. I wasn't sketching for fashion. I was sketching for survival. These were clothes for women who carried the weight of the world on their backs and still walked into rooms like they belonged. Clothes for women like me. One night, while cleaning an executive office downtown, I stumbled upon a stack of fashion magazines spread across a glass conference table. Vogue, Harper's, Elle. I paused, fingers trembling as I flipped through the glossy pages. For months I'd avoided this kind of beauty, too painful, too out of reach. But that night, I felt something stir. There, on the cover, was a model in an emerald gown that looked like a battle flag. I whispered to myself, I could have designed that. And maybe I still could. I started bringing a small notebook to work. I drew during my lunch breaks, during bus rides, on napkins at the diner. I sketched through exhaustion and hunger and self-doubt, and somehow the pages filled themselves. I didn't tell anyone, not even the girls. It was mine, the only part of me that still felt like mine. Then came Nina. She was a customer at the diner, early 30s, purple streaks in her hair, always typing furiously on her phone. One evening she left behind a bright red folder. I caught her just before she left. "Miss, you forgot this." She smiled. "Thanks. You work here full-time?" "Part-time," I said. "I clean offices at night." She nodded. "Hustle. I respect that." She glanced down at my sketchbook, open beside the register where I'd left it. "Wait, did you draw this?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just ideas." Nina blinked at the page. "Then again, this isn't just ideas, this is fashion. I run a blog, Threads of Real, 50K followers. You need to let me feature this." I laughed. Nobody wants fashion from a waitress with 2 kids and a busted water heater. She looked me dead in the eye. "You're wrong. Women need this. They're starving for it." That night, she took pictures of my designs and posted a teaser online. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message I didn't expect. "I need this wrap dress for my divorce hearing. It's the only thing I've seen that makes me feel powerful again." That was the moment the world cracked open again. Just slightly. Just enough to let a little light in. And for the first time in years, I started to believe I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning to rise. The orders started slowly. One woman from Atlanta who'd seen Nina's blog post and wanted a strength dress for her custody hearing. Another from Portland who asked for a blazer that didn't scream corporate, but whispered, "I'm still standing." I sketched between shifts, during break room smoke smells and the hum of fluorescent lights. I sewed after midnight in our tiny apartment, with Nora and Sophie asleep just feet away, and the buzz of my old singer machine threatening to wake them with every stitch. I worked at our kitchen table, using fabric I bought in remnants and clearance bins, turning scraps into structure. I learned to stretch a single yard into a miracle, to reinforce weak seams not just with thread but with willpower. Each garment was its own little war story, lined with resilience, edged with quiet defiance. And women wore them like armor. After a few weeks, Nina called me breathless. "You're not going to believe this. I posted a follow-up about you. The response is insane. People are asking if you have a storefront, a line, even a damn newsletter." "A newsletter?" I laughed. "I don't even have a proper business card." "You do now," she said. "Check your inbox. Also, I took the liberty of making you an Instagram." "You did what?" "I named it Phoenix Hale. You know, like your name, but also the whole rising from the ashes thing. Trust me, it works." It did. Within a month, I had 5 regular clients. Women who'd been through fire and still wanted to look like they owned the room. Divorced lawyers, breast cancer survivors. One woman who'd just left an abusive marriage and wanted a dress to wear to her first date in 10 years. "I want to feel beautiful again," she said, "but not fragile." I poured everything I had into that dress, sewed courage into the seams. When she sent a photo a week later, smiling with a soft pride in her eyes I hadn't seen in any mirror in years, I cried at the kitchen sink. "You made me feel like myself again," she wrote. That's when I knew. This wasn't just sewing. This wasn't just fashion. This was reclamation. The girls started to notice. One morning, as I was pinning a mock-up on an old mannequin I'd bought off Craigslist, Nora looked up from her cereal and said, "Mommy, you look different." "Different how?" I asked, brushing lint from my sleeve. Sophie chimed in, always bolder. "Less sad." I paused. "Not thinner, not prettier, not tired, less sad." That hit deeper than I expected. Later that week, I picked up a dress from Mrs. Patterson, a long-time alteration client, and she noticed a sketch poking out from my folder. "You made this?" she asked, pushing up her bifocals. I nodded. "My daughter's graduating from nursing school. She's had a hell of a year, divorced, 2 kids, lost her mom. I want her to feel proud that day. Can you make this for her?" I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. For 2 weeks, I worked on that dress like it was a sacred thing. Navy wrap style with subtle pleating that hugged without squeezing. Hidden panels so she could nurse if needed. Pockets because women need places to carry things we're too tired to say. When she tried it on, she twirled once and burst into tears. "I feel like Wonder Woman," she whispered. That was the first time I allowed myself to believe I was doing something bigger than survival. At night, after the girls were asleep, I'd sit alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by loose threads and fabric scraps, and sketch. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Ideas came like old friends returning. Strong shoulders, asymmetrical hems, designs that moved like the women who wore them, bruised, bold, full of grace. The best ones were born between exhaustion and hope, when I was too tired to filter myself and too stubborn to quit. One rainy Tuesday, Nina stopped by the apartment unannounced. "I need you to come with me," she said. "Nina, I've got 3 blazers to finish and no babysitter." "Call Mrs. Alvarez. This is important." I sighed but listened. Something in her tone was different. She drove us to the Riverside Arts District, to a small gallery space being used for a local entrepreneur showcase. The crowd was all women, stylists, artists, designers, small business owners, and they knew her. "You're Nina Cho," one whispered. "I follow your blog." And then Nina did something wild. She pulled out her phone, opened my Instagram, and said, "Ladies, meet Monica Hale, the woman behind Phoenix Hale. If you don't know her yet, you will." There was a beat of silence, then applause. Actual, real applause. I felt like I'd stumbled onto someone else's life. A boutique owner approached me after the event. "We're curating a local designer rack next month," she said. "You have pieces available?" I said yes before my fear could say no. That night, I walked through the front door still dazed. Sophie looked up from the couch. "Where were you?" I knelt beside her. Somewhere I almost didn't believe I belonged. Nora squinted. "You're smiling funny." I was. It felt foreign and familiar all at once. That weekend, the boutique called. They sold 2 of my dresses in 48 hours. One client left a note, "Finally, clothes that know how I survived." Phoenix Hale began to rise. The apartment still had broken faucets. The fridge still hummed too loud. The rent was still late some months. But I was building something. Something real. Not for David. Not for the world. For me. For the woman I'd buried under motherhood, under obligation, under heartbreak. The next Monday I got a text from Nina. "We need to talk branding and packaging and, wait for it, launch strategy. Call me." Then, another message from a stranger this time. "I'm getting remarried at 52. I want a dress that says, 'I made it. Can you help me?'" I stared at that message for a long time. Then I looked at my hands, calloused, tired, stained from thread dye, and I whispered to myself, "Yes, I can." I didn't know it yet, but the life I thought had ended in that perfect kitchen 3 years ago, it was just beginning to bloom. By the time fall swept in with its rust-colored leaves and sharp winds, I had outgrown our little kitchen table setup. The orders kept pouring in: custom dresses, statement coats, power suits for women attending court dates, job interviews, even funerals. Everyone came with a story. Women who had been cheated on, fired, widowed, forgotten, and each one of them wanted something more than fabric. They wanted dignity. They wanted proof they were still here. Phoenix Hale wasn't just a side hustle anymore. It was becoming a movement, a whisper turning into a roar. And I, Monica Hale, once a waitress, a janitor, a woman crushed beneath the weight of abandonment, was now a name that women said with hope. It happened so subtly I almost didn't realize it. I rented a tiny storefront on the edge of the arts district. It had creaky floors and drafty windows, but it had light. Big windows that caught the morning sun and poured it across bolts of fabric like blessings. The girls helped me paint the walls white and gold. Sophie picked out a rug she said looked fancy but tough, like us. Nora hung up our handmade sign. Phoenix Hale, burned but not broken. Nina stood in the middle of the space and clapped. "You're official now," she said. "Try not to cry in front of your first customer." I did. Twice. We launched the grand opening with no champagne, no influencers, no photographers, just heart and word of mouth. A few clients showed up with flowers. One brought cupcakes. Someone from the city's lifestyle magazine wandered in, and 2 weeks later, we were featured in their "Women Who Are Changing the Game" column. I hung the article in a frame behind the counter. Right beside it, I pinned a crayon drawing of a red dress that Nora insisted we include in the spring line. Then something extraordinary happened. A woman named Clarissa Moreno, a city council candidate, came in one day. She wanted a jacket for her campaign debate. Something bold, she said. Something that says I'm not afraid of a single damn thing. I made her a crimson wool blazer with clean lines and steel gray buttons that caught the light just right. She won the debate. Then she won the election. And she told every reporter who asked about her wardrobe, I wear Phoenix Hail because I fight like hell. After that, we were flooded. We couldn't keep up. Mina and I hired 2 seamstresses and a part-time assistant. I moved production into the back room. The storefront became our heart. Women came in with tears in their eyes and left standing taller. Still, I didn't tell David. I didn't tell anyone from my past. Not because I wanted revenge, not anymore. But because Phoenix Hail wasn't built for them. It was built from the ashes of what they left behind. And then, one spring afternoon, as I was fitting a client in the boutique's back room, my phone buzzed. A name popped up that I hadn't seen in 10 years. Lauren Easton. Lauren had been my roommate in college. We'd lost touch after graduation, when life swept us in different directions. She into high-end interior design and marriage, me into motherhood and sacrifice. Her message was simple. Monica, I saw your store on TV. I can't believe this. Call me ASAP. Big news. I hesitated before dialing. Something in my stomach twisted. She picked up on the second ring. Monica Hale, I swear, I screamed when I saw you on that segment. You're famous. I laughed, unsure how to respond, trying my best to keep the lights on. I mean it. You're incredible. Hey, this might sound insane, but I need a dress. My heart fluttered. My heart fluttered. Of course. For what? My wedding, she said. She said, her voice giddy. It's a whirlwind. He's amazing. Rich, gorgeous, sophisticated, and somehow still down to earth. We met at a fundraiser, and now, well, here we are. I smiled politely, even though my stomach turned. Congratulations, Lauren. Thank you. It's next month. And guess what? He's a lawyer, big firm. New York. His name is David. David Strickland. Isn't that such a strong name? My hands went numb. I didn't speak. Couldn't. My mouth dried up. My throat closed. Monica? You still there? I forced my voice through a choke. Yeah, I'm here. Just processing. I'll send you his picture. We look so cute together. She did. A second later, my screen lit up with the image. There he was, David. My David. The man who walked out of our lives without so much as a backward glance. The man who hadn't seen his daughters in nearly 8 years, his arms wrapped around Lauren, smiling like the past never existed. I wanted to scream, or throw the phone, or crawl into bed and cry like I had that first night he left. But I didn't do any of those things. I stared at the screen, I looked at his eyes, and I let the truth settle in. He didn't deserve this woman, he didn't deserve this lie. Because Lauren didn't know. She couldn't. She didn't know he'd been married, that he had children, that he'd built his new life on the erasure of our family. She didn't know the man she was marrying had abandoned his own flesh and blood. I'd be honored to design your dress, I said calmly. She squealed. I knew you'd say yes. I want something timeless, elegant, classic but with an edge. You know me. Yes, I knew her. And now I knew what I had to do. Over the next few weeks, I worked on her gown with surgical precision, lace detail, silk lining, delicate buttonwork down the back. It was one of the finest pieces I'd ever made, and every stitch hummed with tension. Each time she came for a fitting, she brought stories about David's kindness, his clean slate, how he never married but had been through heartbreak. I stitched silently. During one fitting, she said, "You'd love him, Monica. He's such a feminist. He even cried when I told him I want to keep my business after the wedding. I smiled. Sounds like quite a man. The dress was nearly done. The wedding was scheduled at a vineyard just outside the city. 100 guests, she said. And it'll be the event of the year. It would be, but not for the reasons she thought. Because the past wasn't gone, and I was done pretending we didn't exist. I wasn't just the woman he left behind. I was the woman he'd have to face. And I wasn't coming alone. The vineyard was perched on the edge of a quiet hill, the kind of place where everything looked like it had been filtered through a golden lens. Lavender lining the gravel walkways, grapevines coiled in neat rows, and lanterns strung from tree to tree like stars waiting to be lit. It was the kind of venue you pick when you want to look effortlessly elegant, the kind that screams curated perfection. And standing in the middle of it all was the man who once told me I was too plain to stand beside him at company galas. Bookmark. I watched from my car across the parking lot, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. Sophie and Nora sat in the back seat, dressed in matching midnight blue dresses I'd made just for this moment. They didn't know why we were here yet. All they knew was Mommy was making a delivery. All they knew was that I had asked them, very gently, if they'd like to meet the man in the photograph, the one with the familiar jawline and the coward smile. Nora, ever the intuitive one, asked me, "Is he the reason you cried on your birthday last year?" And I couldn't lie. "Yes," I said softly, "but he's also the reason I became who I am." I didn't cry that morning. I had done all my crying in the months leading up to it. The day Lauren sent me the official invitation, engraved no less, I held it like an artifact. It read like something out of a royal newsletter. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Lauren Easton and David Strickland," followed by dates, dress codes, and a note about no children unless part of the wedding party. That last part made me laugh. Our daughters weren't part of any party. They weren't even supposed to exist. But I existed, and they did, too. The week before the wedding, I received another message. This time, from an old mutual friend who'd also been invited. "Monica, I thought you should know. David's telling people his ex-wife died, that you ran off with some man and a baby, a boy, not twins, not girls, a son." It didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how calmly I read those words. Years ago, they would have gutted me. Now, they felt like confirmation of everything I'd survived. He had buried us, erased us from his version of history. And I was about to become unforgettable. The day before the wedding, I finished the gown. It was stunning. Soft ivory silk, hand-sewn lace along the shoulders, a dramatic open back that curved like a whisper. It wasn't just a dress, it was a masterpiece. And it was also my final gift to a woman walking into a fire she didn't yet see. When Lauren came to pick it up, she twirled in the mirror and gasped. "David's going to lose his mind when he sees me in this." I just smiled. "He will." She kissed my cheek and thanked me again. "You made me feel like royalty." I placed the garment bag gently over her shoulder. "Every queen deserves to know the truth." She laughed, not understanding. "You always say the most poetic things." After she left, I turned to the girls. "We're going to the wedding." Sophie blinked. "But we're not invited." "No," I said. "We're not. But we're not crashing, either. We're correcting the guest list." They didn't ask for more. They just nodded. On the day of, we arrived an hour before the ceremony. I parked at the edge of the lot and waited until guests started to trickle in. Men in tailored suits, women in floral gowns, all of them buzzing about the power couple, the dream match, the lawyer, and the designer. I stepped out first, my heels clicking against the stone path. I wore one of my own creations, a sleek black dress with gold embroidery along the neckline and cuffs. My hair was pulled back tight. I wanted no softness, no sympathy. I took my daughter's hands and we walked in together. The hush was immediate, a ripple of murmurs. Some recognized me from the boutique, from articles, interviews, features. Others didn't, but could sense something wrong. I saw him before he saw us. He stood at the altar, laughing with the officiant, looking every bit the polished fraud he'd become. Then his eyes lifted, landed on me, and I watched the color drain from his face like a spill. Lauren was just stepping out from the guest house, escorted by her father, her veil floating like mist around her shoulders. That's when the whisper began. Speak now, or forever hold your peace. I didn't speak, not yet. I walked slowly, deliberately. The girls flanked me like guards. Lauren noticed the movement first. She paused. David stared like he was watching a ghost. David, I said loudly, stopping at the first row of seats. You forgot to mention a few things. He stammered. What are you doing here? I smiled tightly, delivering a custom piece. Then I turned to the guests. My name is Monica Hale. I was David's first wife. Gasps. One man dropped his champagne glass. These are our daughters, Sophie and Nora, twins. Not a son, not a baby he lost, not a tragic mystery. Just two girls he left and lied about. Lauren froze. What is she talking about? David stepped toward me. This is crazy. She's unstable. I held up my hand. I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to ruin anything. I'm here so that the truth is present in the room before the vows are said. Because lies like the ones you've told, David, don't just vanish. They fester. And they rot everything you build. He tried to speak, but Lauren interrupted him. Is it true? She asked. He didn't answer. He just looked at the ground. Lauren looked at the girls, then at me. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you deserve to feel beautiful in the dress I made you. And because the truth always arrives, eventually. Lauren nodded slowly. Then she turned, walked back down the aisle alone, and vanished into the guest house. The guests stared in stunned silence. David stood at the altar, alone, humiliated, hollow. I turned to the girls. We're done here. And we walked out, three shadows, leaving behind a man who had once thought we were disposable. But ashes don't disappear. Sometimes they rise. The sun was hot and unforgiving that afternoon, drenching the vineyard in a golden haze that shimmered over every polished table and every guest fanning themselves with monogrammed programs. A string quartet played softly beneath a canopy of oak trees, their melodies weaving through rows of linen-covered chairs. Everything about the wedding was calculated to perfection, down to the imported roses climbing the trellises and the champagne chilling in buckets by the bar. And there I stood, in the shade just beyond the crowd, watching it all unfold like the final act of a play I never auditioned for. The girls were beside me, Sophie gripping my hand, Nora quietly watching the aisle from beneath her curls. They were so calm, so quiet, like they could sense this wasn't just about a wedding, this was about truth. This was about being seen. I could feel my heart in my throat, not from nerves but from sheer bone-deep resolution. I had nothing left to lose, no lies to protect, no face to save. I had already buried the version of myself that begged for explanations, for apologies, for scraps of closure. She was gone. The woman standing here today was someone else entirely. When Lauren appeared at the top of the aisle, a hush swept through the crowd. The music shifted into a slow waltz. She looked breathtaking, radiant in the dress I made for her, ivory silk flowing like moonlight, a low back that revealed just enough spine to whisper strength. Her father beamed beside her. Guests rose to their feet, camera phones lifted. The show had begun. And at the end of the aisle stood David. His tuxedo was flawless, his smile charming, confident. The picture of a man ready to rewrite history in front of an audience of admirers. But his eyes told a different story. The moment they met mine, across the chairs, above the heads of his wealthy guests, his smile cracked. Just for a second. Just enough for me to see the fear flicker behind it. He hadn't believed I'd show. Even after everything. He thought I'd keep quiet. Thought I'd do what women like me were expected to do. Disappear, suffer, stay silent. He didn't know me at all. I waited until the priest began speaking, his voice calm and rehearsed. We are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Lauren Easton and David Strickland. I could feel Nina's eyes on me from across the seating area. She had come for support. Standing in the back like a quiet sentry in heels and mirrored sunglasses, she gave me the tiniest nod. The time had come. If anyone here has reason that these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, the priest announced, speak now or forever hold your peace. My heels clicked loud against the stone aisle as I stepped forward. Gasps rose like a sudden storm. All heads turned. I didn't wait for permission. I have a reason, I said clearly, calmly, and it's standing right here beside me. I moved forward with Sophie and Nora at my side. David's face drained of all color. Lauren's brow furrowed in confusion. She tilted her head, still not understanding. Who are you? She asked. I stopped at the foot of the aisle, looked straight at her. My name is Monica Hale. I was David's first wife. These are our daughters. Whispers. Murmurs. A few guests turned toward David, their polite smiles replaced with suspicion. Lauren blinked. What? David started to stammer. This is ridiculous. Monica, this isn't the time. But I raised a hand. I won't take long. I just think everyone here deserves to know who this man really is, especially his bride. Lauren shook her head, dazed. David told me, he said his wife died, that she left him, with a baby, a son. Nora stepped forward. He's never met us. Not once. Sophie followed, her voice steady. He told our mom she wasn't enough. Then he disappeared. The silence that followed was suffocating. You could hear a leaf fall. You could hear a heartbreak. Lauren turned slowly to David. You lied to me? He opened his mouth, but nothing came out, just air. Just the panic of a man caught beneath the weight of his own mask. Bookmark, I didn't want to ruin what we had, he finally managed. Lauren looked like she might collapse. She stared at the dress she wore, the one I had made with my own 2 hands. Her expression twisted, not with shame but with rage. You had me fitted by your ex-wife? She said, her voice breaking. You wore this lie all the way to the altar? I didn't think. No, you didn't think, she cut in. Because you don't see people, David, you erase them. She turned to me, her eyes glistening. You knew, and you still made me this beautiful dress? I did, I said, because every woman deserves to walk into her future feeling powerful. But now you know what you're stepping into. The priest cleared his throat awkwardly. Should we continue? Lauren took one final look at David. No, she said, and her voice rang like a verdict. There won't be a wedding today. She took off the ring he'd given her, pressed it into his palm. Then she walked past me, her train flowing behind her like a flag of independence. I stood still, watched her go, felt something settle deep inside me. An ache, yes, but also a strange peace. David was frozen in place. Guests began to leave quietly, murmuring and averting their eyes. He stood there, jaw tight, hands clenched. The picture of a man who finally realized he had lost everything. He turned to me. "You couldn't let me have this, could you?" "I didn't take anything from you," I replied. "You gave it away the day you walked out on your family." Then I took my daughters by the hand and walked back down the aisle. This time, not to plead or to beg or to expose, but to reclaim. We stepped into the sunlight, and behind us, the perfect wedding crumbled. The air outside the vineyard felt different once we stepped out, cooler somehow, clearer. Maybe it was the breeze finally reaching me, or maybe it was the weight that had been lifted off my chest, the years of silence and shame cracking and falling behind with every step I took away from that altar. Sophie and Nora didn't say anything at first. They just walked beside me, fingers wrapped in mine like we were holding each other together. It wasn't until we reached the car that Nora broke the silence. "Are you okay, Mom?" I turned to her, brushing a curl behind her ear. "I am now." That night, we stopped at a small diner just off the highway, one of those places that smells like bacon grease and old coffee, with sticky booths and laminated menus. It was far from glamorous, but it was warm, and it was real. The girls were starving. I let them order whatever they wanted: milkshakes, pancakes, fries, extra whipped cream. I didn't even blink. When the waitress asked me if we were celebrating something, I smiled and said, "Closure." She raised her eyebrows but didn't pry, just brought us a slice of pie on the house. That night, when the girls finally fell asleep in the back seat on the way home, I drove in silence. The road a ribbon unraveling under the headlights. My thoughts drifted, not to David or his lies, but to Lauren. I wondered what she was doing. If she'd left him for good. If she'd found the strength to start over like I once did. Part of me hoped she'd call. The other part of me knew she wouldn't. Not because she was ungrateful, but because some wounds are too fresh to reopen, even for gratitude. I understood that. I lived that. When we got home, the apartment was dark, familiar, safe. I carried the girls inside one by one, tucking them into their beds with the care only a mother who's nearly lost everything knows how to give. Then I sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the fridge the only sound, and just breathed. For the first time in years, I had nothing to defend, nothing to hide. Phoenix Hale had started as a way to survive, but now it was something bigger. The boutique was growing faster than I could keep up. Orders were stacking, journalists wanted interviews, investors were reaching out, and suddenly, I wasn't just Monica Hale, the woman with a sewing machine and a past. I was a name people respected. But success wasn't the victory I thought it would be. Not really. The real triumph was walking into that wedding and speaking the truth, in giving voice to my daughters, who had never asked for justice, only acknowledgement. And now they had it. The next morning, I woke up to an inbox flooded with messages. Apparently, someone had filmed the confrontation at the wedding. It had gone viral. The headline read, "Bookmark us swirl vulvines MCU. Woman interrupts wedding to reveal groom's hidden past and brings his forgotten daughters with her." Part of me recoiled. I hadn't done it for an audience. I hadn't planned for the attention, but then I started reading the comments. "I left my ex for the same reason. Thank you for speaking for women like me. Monica Hale is a force. I want to wear her clothes and hear her speak. Those daughters will never forget what their mom did for them." One message stood out. It was from Lauren. "Monica, I don't know how to thank you. You saved me. Not just from a bad marriage, but from becoming another woman who silences her gut for the sake of appearances. The dress you made, I'm keeping it. Not for the wedding that didn't happen, but for the day I decide to marry myself to the life I actually deserve. With love, Lauren." Bookmark. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I cried. Not the quiet tears of grief or regret, but tears of release, of pride. Later that week, I held a staff meeting at the boutique. Nina brought donuts and a speaker. The girls played in the corner, making their own sketches on scrap paper. I stood before my team, our little crew of fighters, dreamers, and late-night stitchers, and told them we were expanding. "We're not just a brand anymore," I said. "We're a community, and I want to make space for more women like us, ones who've been pushed aside, underestimated, or forgotten. I want them to wear our designs and feel like they're walking into battle with armor made from truth." The room clapped. Someone yelled, "To the rise," and the rest joined in. To the rise. In the weeks that followed, I got a call from a nonprofit that supported women transitioning out of domestic abuse shelters. They asked if I'd consider designing a capsule collection for their clients, something affordable, professional, empowering. I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "and we'll donate half the first run." That night, I told the girls about it over spaghetti. "So you're making clothes for women who need a fresh start?" Sophie asked. "Exactly." "Like how you had to start over after Dad?" Nora added. I nodded slowly. "Yes, baby. Just like that." Sophie tilted her head. "Then you're not just a fashion designer, Mom. You're a story fixer." I laughed, tears in my eyes. Maybe I am. The next morning, I updated the Phoenix Hale website. I added a new line to our About page. "We don't just design clothes. We help women reclaim the narrative." Months passed. The boutique grew. The team expanded. A second location opened in D.C. We partnered with charities, appeared in magazines, and hosted workshops for young designers. But none of that compared to the day Sophie brought home a school project where she had to write about her hero. She chose me. Her drawing showed me with a cape made out of measuring tape and scissors. In one hand I held a dress. In the other, my daughter's. Beneath it, she wrote, "My mom is a hero because she didn't just fix her life. She stitched something better." And in that moment, surrounded by love, fabric, and the quiet strength of my children, I knew I had finally come home. It's funny how life circles back to you, not always with apologies or explanations, but with opportunities you never expected. A year after that vineyard confrontation, I found myself standing on the stage of a downtown auditorium beneath soft lights facing a full crowd of women, young and old, CEOs and single moms, all wearing pieces from my Phoenix Hale collection. They didn't come for the clothes. Not really. They came for the story. And I told it. Every jagged piece of it. How I fell in love with a man who loved ambition more than family. How I stitched my life back together with thread and sheer will. How I walked into his new life not with a scream, but with the truth. And 2 daughters who carried my strength in their spines. When I finished, there was a silence that didn't feel like absence. It felt like awe, then applause. Not polite claps, but something deeper. Something that vibrated in my chest and made my knees shake. I wasn't crying. I was rooted. I was seen. Afterward, a woman in her 60s came up to me, her hair silver and perfectly curled, her lipstick fierce. "I left my husband at 52, she said. "He said I was too old to start over. But now I run a catering company. You made me believe I didn't miss my shot." I squeezed her hands. "You didn't, you just changed targets." We hugged, and it hit me then. My story wasn't just mine, it had become a map for others. A quiet invitation to begin again. That summer, we launched the Resilience line, a collection inspired by the stories women sent me after the video of the wedding went viral. We called it Threaded Truths. Each piece came with a hidden label inside, printed with a quote from a survivor. One read, "They buried me. They didn't know I was a seed." Orders flew in. Clients wore them to divorce hearings, therapy sessions, memorial services, graduations. Life's thresholds, the hard stops and brave starts. Women began sending in before and after pictures, photos of them in court papers, hospital gowns, and then in our power suits and recovery dresses. They weren't modeling, They were reclaiming space. I hired 3 more full-time seamstresses. We started hosting stitch circles in the boutique, monthly gatherings where women shared stories while learning to sew. Some were quiet, some sobbed. One woman stitched her trauma into a pillow cover she said she'd never sell, never use, just keep, so she'd remember that even pain can have shape and color. One night, after a particularly emotional circle, Nora asked me, "Do you think Dad ever tells people about us now?" I didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but we don't need his story anymore. We have our own." Sophie, ever the sharper blade, added, "Maybe one day he'll wish he could be part of it." I smiled. Maybe, but by then we'll be too far ahead. In early fall, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email. A letter. Handwritten in clean, tight script on expensive stationery. I didn't need to read the return address. I knew who it was from before I opened it. Bookmark, Uzi David. He wrote that he was sorry, that he had watched the viral video, that he was ashamed of what he did, that he thought of the girls every day, that he wanted to meet them, if not as a father, then as a man trying to reckon with the damage he'd done. Bookmark. I sat with that letter for a long time. Read it twice, then a third time. I didn't cry. I didn't burn it either. I left it in my desk drawer, beneath my measuring tape and fabric swatches. A relic. A reminder. That night, I asked the girls how they'd feel if he ever reached out. Nora shrugged. Sophie said, "Only if we want him to. Not because he wants to." I nodded. "That's right. You get to decide who you let into your story now." And they did. Eventually, they wrote him back. Not much. A few lines. No promises, no open doors, just enough to close a chapter on their terms. Weeks later, we hosted our first Phoenix Gala, a fundraiser for women-owned startups and abuse recovery centers. I walked into the ballroom in a crimson suit tailored to my frame, head held high. My daughters walked beside me. Nora in a black jumpsuit with gold trim she helped design, and Sophie in a dress made from the same fabric as the one I wore when I walked into that vineyard. Nina gave a speech. Lauren came too. We hadn't spoken much after the wedding, but when we saw each other, we embraced like old friends who'd survived the same fire. She whispered in my ear, "You saved me." I whispered back, "You saved yourself." After dinner, I stood at the podium and looked out into a sea of faces, women who had been broken and had stitched themselves back together in beautiful, wild patterns. "I used to think strength was about surviving," I told them. "But it's not. Strength is about choosing yourself, even when the world tells you not to. It's about walking into the room they said you didn't belong in and owning it anyway." They stood, they clapped, and for one breathless moment, I forgot every bruise, every betrayal, every night I thought I wouldn't make it. I had made it. Not in spite of the pain. Because of it. Later, after the gala, I sat on the boutique's rooftop with the girls, eating leftover cake from paper napkins, our heels kicked off beside us. Nora leaned on my shoulder. "Do you ever miss him?" I thought about that. "No," I said slowly. "I miss who I hoped he was, but who I became after he left. I wouldn't trade that for anything." Sophie nodded. "Good, because we like this version of you." And I laughed, eyes full of starlight. From a broken home came a bold brand. From a buried woman came a blazing phoenix. From a single story came thousands more, stitched into every thread we touched. And somewhere out there, I knew there were still women standing at the edge of their own story, still afraid, still unsure. To them, I say, walk in. Say your name. Bring the truth with you. You're not too late. You are exactly on time. And the world is waiting for your rise. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you're still here, it means something in this journey resonated with you. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. This story wasn't just about betrayal or pain. It was about rising, about choosing to face the truth, even when it hurts, and turning that pain into power. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories don't come with applause, but with quiet courage, standing tall when the world expects you to shrink. So if you're going through something, remember this: your story doesn't end with heartbreak. It begins there. You are allowed to rebuild. You are allowed to thrive. Bookmark. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Which part of the world are you rising in? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or simply gave you hope, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got many more powerful stories coming your way. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and never forget, your voice matters.